20 new artifacts are with us in 14.9, so here's more than 30 comps you can play with them. These artifacts and comps are really fun to play with, and I cannot wait to share them with you today. Just bear in mind that there could have been changes or bug fixes that I'm not aware of when I played them during PvE. Huge thanks to Alan, Rapid, NomsyDiff and my community who gave me loads of ideas and comps for this video. And this video is part of the composition competition, which I'll talk about more later, but thank you to everyone who participated. Please show your support by subscribing to our channels. For now, let's get into it. Now, let's start with my favorite comp, which is Inspiring Idol. If you've seen any of my streams or my shorts, then you would already know that with this item, I had a Kench that managed to reach upwards of 50k HP consistently. I ended up sharing this to Reddit amongst other places, and the Giga Chat that is Tangerine then shared this image of a 2-star Kench casually hitting over 2 million HP. Now, there probably was a bug with stacking double idol that's probably already been fixed, but still, that's an amazing achievement, and I have never seen anything close to this before, ever. But what's the secret here? How was such absurd HP numbers even remotely possible? Well, I'm not sure what happened in Tangerine's game, but I'll tell you my secret, which is a special interaction with Kench, Inspiring Epitaph and Udyr. But firstly, let's establish who are the best idol users and why. Simply put, it's Kench or Ornn. These are the only units in set 11 that gain shields based on the current max health. Forbidden Idol would then give them more max health, which then becomes a bigger shield, and that then turns into more max health. This HP loop is perfect because these units just scale exponentially with just a single item. Idol is okay in units like Garen, Illaoi and Thresh, but they need a lot of AP to get big shields, and that's instantly a higher demand than Kench or Ornn. Forbidden Idol also includes shields granted at the start of combat as well as from augments, like Crown Guard, Combat Caster, but most importantly, Inspiring Epitaph. The shield from Inspiring Epitaph is an entire 25%. So with Idol, the holder instantly gains 12.5% max health every time a nearby ally dies. So this augment, more than anything else, accelerates the HP growth of your tank and has the best synergy with Forbidden Idol. But another reason why Ornn and Kench are vastly superior users of Idol is the fact that they can both be played alongside Udyr. Udyr is the final piece of the puzzle here because each of his soldiers can proc Inspiring Epitaph. So the combo of Udyr, Idol and Epitaph is godlike because Udyr keeps spawning in filler units that die quickly, proc Epitaph and increase your Idol holder's max HP by 12.5% each and every time. And that is exactly how you can reach such absurd HP numbers. Now, I will say that Kench is better than Ornn even at 2-star because Kench has higher HP scaling on his shield and a lower mana cost ult. Furthermore, Kench will scale up all that flat HP from Idol through Mythic and Bruiser. So the conditions are Forbidden Idol, Inspiring Epitaph and playing Udyr. Ideally, you're playing at least 4 Invokers so Udyr can keep summoning those soldiers. So your board looks something akin to this at level 8. And with this board, you have the option of giving the Idol to Kench or Ornn. But unfortunately, I do think this will fall off late game because Lissandra exists and she turbo hard counters this. But yeah, if you've got Idol and you see Inspiring Epitaph, take that instantly and play Udyr. Your board will be disgusting. I wonder, can any of you guys beat my 80k HP Kench or even get anywhere close to the 2 million HP Kench? If you do, let me know by sharing a screenshot in my Discord. But moving on, let's talk about something even more spicy, and that's a new comp invented by Alan where you play Thresh, but this time he's your AD carry. Now the reason why AD Thresh can work is that Thresh almost has the highest base AD in the entire set, and 3 of the new artifacts allow you to capitalize on that. Specifically, the Silvermere Dawn will give Thresh a huge amount of AD, armor and MR, while the only downside of Silvermere won't really affect Thresh because his base attack speed is 0.5 anyway. There's also Crypt Vampiric Scepter, which will keep Thresh autoing as opposed to casting his ability and give him some healing on top. And lastly, Talisman of Ascension will reliably proc on Thresh as he is 2 range and so can safely sit behind your frontline. So this is what your board will look like, ideally with Thresh, Illaoi and Aphelios free. Your level 8 can be Kayn or Caitlyn, whichever you want it to be. So AD Thresh is surprisingly flexible due to what items he can take, but also due to Fated. You can select whichever Fated bonus to make up for what Thresh is lacking. For example, you can link Syndra and Set if Thresh is lacking Omnivamp and a damage multiplier, or Aphelios on Thresh if he's lacking AD and tankiness. Just bear in mind that Thresh can auto as little as once every 2 seconds, so you need him to hit as hard as possible. I personally love items like Infinity Edge and Last Whisper, but you can't go wrong with Deathblade. Just make sure you have reliable Sunder, as Aphelios may not be enough. I have so much fun playing this comp that I even played it during Mortdog's Artifact tournament if you caught me live. But admittedly, I have struggled due to how contested Thresh can be. And while Thresh is a really fun user of these artifacts, there are better and more meta uses of them. For example, Corrupt Vampiric Scepter is phenomenal on Gnar because his passive will continue to stack. So Gnar gets an incredible amount of AD, which gets further scaled up through AP and Scepter. So Double Titan Scepter Gnar is just insane because he gets so much AD and healing innately, combined with the HP and tankiness he gets from his traits. Anyway, after 22 seconds, Talisman of Ascension will double the health of the holder and give them a damage amp. Now, this section was going to be about how OP Talisman of Ascension was on Bruisers, but I think their hotfix removed the interaction with Talisman and Bruisers, so I wouldn't really recommend taking this item anymore. 22 seconds is a very long time. Post-nerf, Ascension will not proc consistently enough each round. I think this artifact is bait compared to the other ones. But lastly, Silvermere Dawn is better on AD casters like Kha'Zix or Wukong. Both Kha'Zix and Wukong scale well with AD, the tank stacks make up for their squishiness, and their mana costs are so low that they're not really affected by the attack speed debuff as they keep casting. And through Wukong, you can easily activate Sage so your carry can heal for all the insane damage they're dealing. But there's also the option of Malphite, who has an ult that applies damage in a cone, but for some reason units that get hit by his ult also get stunned by Silvermere. But the problem with Kha'Zix and Malphite is that they're one cost units and so they'll fall off late game. Generally, Wukong is the most reliable option. I've not tried it, but I also think Silvermere Dawn could be good on Riven as well. But now let's move on to the next artifact. Seeker's Armguard grants AP, armor and MR on takedowns or kills. Now, it is kinda obvious to give this a Sylas since he's a melee AP Bruiser carry and so will use all of these stats really well. So let me cook this a little bit more by combining Seekers with Ionic Spark. The great thing about Sylas is that he can dash towards the enemy backline, which means that he'll be in range and proc the effect of Ionic Spark on the backline. Now, this is amazing because the Ionic Spark damage will give Sylas credit for the takedown if they die, and so Sylas will gain the stacks from Seekers. So this combination makes Sylas scale incredibly quickly and make up for his weakness of being single target. Eventually, Sylas will just have so many stacks that backline carries and mages just can't do anything to him and Sylas will just one-shot them. Hence, Mageseeker Sylas, which I think is lore accurate. Now, ideally you combine Sylas with a Luden for her backline damage and her execute. But this item combination isn't exclusive to Sylas. Many tanks or other melee AP carries can utilize this tech and scale rapidly with Spark and Seekers. But Sylas is certainly the best user as he uses the stats the best and Sylas is incredibly flexible to play around. For example, another great user of Seekers is Malphite. And that's where Rapid's Malphite reroll comes in. With Seekers, Malphite scales so insanely quickly in both AP and armor that his autos start nuking everything in its way. I gotta say, Rapid cooked on this one. This has gotta be one of my favorite out of all of the comps. It's actually so ridiculously fun to watch his Malphite just clap so hard. And as Rapid says here, his Malphite's autos are AoE, he gets takedown credit incredibly easily, and so he can snowball. But even though his base attack speed is pretty low, you still want to give him Rageblade so he can auto more during his ult duration. So his main items are Rageblade and Seekers, then you can give him whatever else. You can't go wrong with Omnivamp like through BT, but what could be insanely funny is Jeweled Gauntlet. So what does the comp actually look like? Well, it's actually pretty flexible as you just want to play Heavenly and Behemoth. Specifically, Behemoth will give Malphite more initial armor and MR so he doesn't get bursted, and some of the Heavenly bonuses will allow Malphite to scale quicker. So you want the AP from Soraka, the attack speed from Wukong, and the HP from Nico. And if you get the spat, then you can get some Omnivamp on top. Also, if Malphite has crit, then you can play Kha'Zix to increase his crit chance. So here's a generic board that you can do well with, but remember that both Heavenly and Behemoth are very flexible, so this can vastly vary. Ghostly is nice here so you don't get stuck on mega tanks, and the healing from Sage feels great. And you also have very flexible level 9 options with Rakan, Lissandra, Udyr, or Azir. Now, something that's just as flexible is the new Mittens artifact. You can put Mittens on literally any unit in the entire set because every unit can use those stats. Attack speed, damage reduction, and movement speed just allow any unit to function well. But it is better on melee carries like Sylas, Set, Lissandra, and especially Lee Sin because they are so tanky. Mittens is definitely the most flexible out of every new and existing artifact, but more importantly, this artifact is so cute when it's on your bench. It's just so cute. And that's actually such a cool part about these new artifacts. I mean, just look at how small this Teemo is, and that's without Mittens. Just imagine if you had Mittens as well. You'd have like an atomic Teemo. I'm not sure how small you can make units in TFT, so please let me know and show me if you get anything smaller. But what isn't small is the range you can gain from the return of RFC. Every kill will now grant the holder more range, and so some units can reach absurd range. However, that's only if their abilities can scale with range. For example, you may think Kayn or Wukong are great users of RFC, however extra range is terrible for these units because their abilities only hit one hex around them, and so giving them range stops them from being able to utilize their kits properly. You need to give RFC to units that aren't impeded by extra range, like Qiyana. Regardless of range, Qiyana's ult will always hit a primary target and any units 2 hexes behind them, and Qiyana will always try to reposition to hit as many units as possible with her ult, so Qiyana can farm range very quickly as both her primary and secondary damage is very lethal. I covered Qiyana reroll in depth in my recent video, so check that out if you want to hear more. But ideally you want to play around Heavenly Qiyana like on this board. Although this duelist board is also an option, Heavenly is just better. Overall, RFC is best on units like Qiyana who have secondary damage that can farm the range, and not on units like Kayn who have negative range scaling. But the opposite of this is true for the next artifact, that being Prowler's Claw. With Prowler's Claw, any unit can cleanse negative effects, gain backline access, and a huge damage amp. However, the problem with Prowlers is that units can still take aggro from the opponent's carries, and if they don't have enough HP or tankiness, then they will just die to the enemy carry and do nothing. The holder of this item needs to be able to tank damage as well as be able to heal for the damage they deal, whilst also being able to get away with building survivability items. There aren't many AD units that can do that, but of course, Kayn can. Kayn gets loads of damage from Reaper and his transformation, and so you can build Hodge BT Prowlers on Kayn and watch him completely nuke boards whilst also being able to tank for years. Most AD units, like Qiyana, don't have as much as Kayn, and so they can't function nearly as well as he can. But an okay secondary option is Lee Sin, and is kind of similar to Kayn in terms of tankiness, but Lee won't deal nearly as much damage. However, there is an artifact that all AD melee carries will love, and that's Spectral Cutlass. Spectral Cutlass teleports the holder to the opposite side of the board at the beginning of combat, and again, this is an item that favors AD units. With this item, you can snipe the enemy carry before they do anything, especially with ults that can hit multiple units. Now, I will say that Kayn's damage is mostly in his transformation, and so he may not deal enough damage before he teleports back. I think Spectral Cutlass is better for AD carries that will quickly cast, like Lee Sin and Qiyana. These two also ramp up through Duelist. As I mentioned in my Qiyana reroll guide, you should always place your Spectral holder in your centermost, rearmost hex so they can go left or right and hit as many enemy carries as possible and nuke the backline. But at this point, I'm starting to get sick of AD artifacts, so let's move on to an AP one. So Luden's converts any extra overkill damage into huge splash damage that can completely nuke any nearby units. So of course Caitlyn is a great choice here as she tends to overkill a lot, and the Luden's damage can proc Luden's again if it overkills, which is common since the ghostly specters transfer before the Luden's damage will hit. So of course any Caitlyn reroll comp is great, but here's a new variant from Nomsy Diff, which is Heavenly Caitlyn. Through Heavenly, you give Caitlyn as many raw stats as possible, so her ults completely nuke, procs Luden's, and proceeds to wipe the board. But is there another Luden's user? Yeah, Rapid has you covered, and that's through Kog'Maw. I mean, just watch this clip. Kog'Maw completely nukes the entire enemy board with a single cast because he is scaled so much and how much damage amp he has, and the subsequent Luden's procs are just as mental. Now, a lot of the damage here is behind those talismans of Ascension Kog'Maw has. So how do we even mimic a fraction of this power? Well, we need a talisman for ourselves or Kog'Maw's Lucky Paws Hero Augment. Either of these give Kog'Maw an insane damage boost with Luden's. However, one of these conditions must be met for this to work, but ideally you have both. Anyway, Luden's is great for Kog'Maw as that is the only damage item you need on him. Kog'Maw's damage scales with his max HP, so as Kog'Maw gains more HP through his passive and you play more Bruisers, you can greatly increase Kog'Maw's damage, which means that your item options on Kog'Maw are extremely flexible. I'd recommend tank items or sustain items, but again, you have a lot of options. Lucky Luden's makes me curious about how Luden's would work on Ethereal Blade Shen, so if you get that setup, let me know how it went. But I will say that the setup for Kog'Maw is far more difficult than Caitlyn's, so if you want a safe Luden's user, just go for Caitlyn. Actually, as I was making this video, Ray Tiger left this Reddit comment on my post talking about how Kha'Zix and Kog'Maw are also great users of Luden's as they target the lowest HP unit within range. So they will both consistently overkill, however for Kha'Zix it can be precarious as Luden's doesn't give him resistances or Omnivamp. Thus you need your augments to make up for this deficit. But moving on, let's talk about Suspicious Trenchcoat. Here's another one from Alan. With Trenchcoat, the effects of the holder's items can proc again, and that includes the effect of the new support item Unstable Treasure Chest. Even one trench coat and one treasure chest will result in 12 bonus items for your team, which is insane. But what if you don't get an unstable treasure chest? Well, you can also go trench coat Orns, so each of the little Orns can farm a ton of items for your team. There's also other crazy combinations with trench coat where you combine it with diamond hands. What's insane here is that both trench coat and diamond hands proc their effect at 50% HP, but it's always diamond hands that procs first and then trench coat. So you can proc diamond hands up to 4 times per combat, get 4 gold, store for loads of time, and farm so many items. Similarly, if you have Blacksmith TG and it rolls Suspicious Trench Coat, then each of the clones will re-roll the TG for different artifacts. But is there any carry potential with Trench Coat? Well, again, Alan's got you covered with Trench Coat Teemo. In Alan's words, this has potential because the Teemo DOT can stack on the same unit, but it's risky because Teemo needs to be in the front line so we can proc Trench Coat. Therefore, Teemo needs Edge of Night, which each of the clones will be able to proc individually. But be careful, the Trench Coat clones can drop items if they're altered by Lysandra. Moving on, let's talk about Innovating Locket. This artifact is great for any tank that has an ult that increases their tankiness, but particularly if they increase their max HP. For example, there's Diana, Ornn, Amumu, Garen with his hero augment, or Yorick with or without his. Yorick and Garen can scale very quickly with this artifact and is great in conjunction with other artifacts like Forbidden Idol or Talisman of Ascension. Locket will help any tank cast numerous times in combat due to the mana generation, which means that this item is great for any tank. My personal favourite is easily Yorick because he can scale so quickly with the Locket mana generation. But the next artifact is a tank's worst nightmare. If the holder stuns anyone, they will take 30% of their max HP as magic damage. This artifact is super scary for any unit as now the holder CC will now deal a ton of damage alongside it. Now, there actually aren't that many CC units in set 11, but the 3 units with the most consistent CC output are easily Rek'Sai, Lux, and Nautilus. Now, Rek'Sai will fall off late game if she's not 3-starred, but Lux will always be a reliable backline option even at 2-star due to Porcelain. But Nautilus can stun many more units, including backline carries, and in turn deal much more damage with this artifact. So you can give Horizon Focus to Lux until you find Naught 2. Also, what's interesting is that I think the damage on this item can crit if you have Jeweled Lotus, but not Gauntlet. Regardless, this artifact is insane if you combine it with Silvermere Dawn, as you'll be proccing the effect of Horizon on every single auto. But this artifact is hard countered by CC immunity because the holder will no longer be able to stun whoever is CC immune, and in turn they won't proc the effect of this artifact. Next up, we have Light Shield Crest, which is extremely straightforward and there's only really 2 great users. First up, there's Thresh, as he gains resistances from Behemoth, and combined with his ability, you can make your board extremely tanky with shields and resistances. Secondly, there's Galio, as his ability gives him loads of armor and MR, which results in bigger shields from Light Shield Crest. But Light Shield isn't the only shield related artifact, there's also Unending Despair. Unending Despair deals damage proportional to the shield value on the holder, so it should be great on the same users as Forbidden Idol, as their shields scale so well with HP and AP. But honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this artifact is probably the least interesting out of the bunch, and I wouldn't really recommend you take it over the others. Having said that, there could be some potential with AP Kench, which was posted to Twitter by Tex Summers. Kench should gain massive shields on this board and in turn maximize the value from Despair. If this board doesn't use Despair well, then I don't know what else can. On the other hand, you may be surprised by how versatile Fishbones is. The holder will gain double their range, but randomly attacks enemies within said range. The stats do favour AD carries, but there's some interesting AP users as well. Let's talk about AD first. Of course, with double the range, snipers will be great users as they will use the range better and deal more damage through the trait, especially if you build items like Runans or Red Buff, as the effects of those items synergize so well with Fishbones. So snipers like Dash and Aphelios are good and reliable choices. But let's talk about something way more fun, and that's Tristana. With this item, Tristana can cross-map ult and nuke backlines, especially with a buff in this patch if you give her IE and DB. It's actually hilarious watching Tristana cross-map, but it's inconsistent, so do be wary of that. And funnily enough, Fishbones isn't bad for Malphite if he's your carry, because you stop him from getting stuck on the tank and he dishes damage out everywhere. Fishbones Azir is equally as funny because Azir's soldiers can find themselves in interesting places. But to answer the question, Fishbones does not work well with Tattoo of Force. Force procs the stun whenever the holder needs to find a new target outside of their range, and so will dash to them. Unfortunately, with Fishbones, all the random enemies are still within range, and so it won't proc Force. But moving on, the last few artifacts are incredibly linear, where only a handful of units really use them well. For example, Blighting Jewel just goes on Teemo and Morgana and that's it. The MR reduction applies per tick of their DOT abilities, and so they reduce MR rapidly and start generating mana extremely quickly. There's really not much else to say. I've tried this item on other AP carries, but it never performed nearly as well. Moving on, we have Cursed Blade. Last time I checked, this item was godlike on Irelia and kinda mediocre on anyone else. For most units, getting 13 stacks is pretty hard, and with the effects of this item being completely negated by Edge and Knight, I honestly don't think this item is that great. And now we have Lichbane, which is again really straightforward. It just goes on units that like blue buff and Nashers like Teemo and Syndra, and that's it really, nothing else to really say about this one. But the very last artifact is Wit's End. And I think there's two ways to use Wit's End. You either put it on a backline carry like Bard or Lux and give them Rage Blade, or you put it on a melee AP carry like Udyr or Lissandra, as they use the resistances from the item very well and they can heal a ton. But I think Bard is very good if you have Wit's End with Harm Assist, as he'll start dealing a ton of true damage. But that's too straightforward. Luckily Rapid is here to save the day with Rage Blade, Wit's End, Malphite, which hits really hard and heals for a ton. If you want something unique, definitely try that out. But yeah, for the most part, that should be everything. As I mentioned earlier, this video is part of the composition competition where I, amongst others, got together to cook up as many new comps as possible to see what you guys would like the most. So make sure you let us know which one was your favourite in the comments. I wonder which one is the fan favourite. But admittedly, I am kinda torn with these new artifacts. While I do think most artifacts feel amazing to play around, some just seem to have a really limited use case, if any. And those artifacts don't really feel unique enough to build entire comps around. They feel very reminiscent of Set 8's hero augments in that regard. But yeah, now I'll pass over the questions to you guys. What do you think about these new artifacts and these new comps? Are there any you're looking forward to playing? Or if you've already tried them, how did it go? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.